You're watching Notepad. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. In the studio with us, RHL Lau, the co-founding partner and managing partner of RHL Ventures. Here talking about not just the investment through Penjana Capital, but of course, investing in sustainable companies. Rachel, thanks again for coming over to Bukit Jalil. It's really quite interesting to have you on. I've had your partner, Raja Hamzah, a few years ago, so it's about time for us to touch base again into some of the things that RHL Ventures is doing. First and foremost is, of course, the matching grant program by Penjana Capital. We want to learn a little bit more about the collaboration that you guys are doing with Ministry of Finance, as well as where you guys are at in terms of deployment of funds in investing in Malaysian startups.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. You know, it's a pleasure coming back. It's been a little while since we've done more Malaysian press. Essentially, the partnership with Penjana Capital is a matching program, as you properly alluded to. We are one of the recipients out of 8 recipients for the fund. We specialize in Series A and Series B. The fund is with KB Investment, which is Kookmin Bank, one of the largest banks in Korea. They're our co-GP partner. The fund is 300 million ringgit, of which 150 million ringgit thereabouts is invested in Malaysian-related companies in Malaysia in the Series A, B, and there's some growth stage, but that mostly, is on a follow-on basis. Mm-hmm. We've invested about 30% of our fund. We typically deploy in 3 years, and therefore it's already 1/3 deployed. I think this year, including the startups, will probably be more or less, fully or 2.5 times away, or about 2.5 years deployed in that sense, and then we'll probably reserve the rest for follow-on investments.
Okay, because of that, is there a target that you need to deploy for this year? You're looking at 60%, 70%?
We'll probably hit up to 75% this year.
All right, we're also talking about the kind of profiles of the companies that you guys are investing in. What would be some of the profiles or features that you look for in investing in these companies?
Sure, we invest in typically Series A, Series B company. It's 2 million US thereabouts, also about 10 million ringgit on an average checks basis. Of course, some people we go in at a million US, some we go at 2 or 3. Essentially, if you think about it from a portfolio standpoint, we will have about 25 to 30 companies. So the average check size will come down to be about 10 to 15 million ringgit thereabouts.
The companies itself?
And the companies itself, we're looking a lot on agriculture, food security, which is something, which is very topical. Even before COVID, I'm quite a bit of a health freak, so I like the healthy stuff. And I think, we're moving towards that. We're looking at education. It was very topical. We looked at digital education for a long time, and also mental health. Obviously, COVID accelerated all these topical issues. And so, it's something that we're investing in quite a bit. In Malaysia, we've invested in quite a bit of company. We've invested in Pandai, which is an edutech. Coincidentally, they were also invested by Harvard, which is a big testament of a Malaysian startup to begin with on the education space. We invested in Naluri, which is a mental health initiative by Azran, who used to run AirAsia. We invested in Fee5O, which is an agri-tech, essentially, moving young agropreneurs from UPM into the farms, but also making sure that they are paid in line of market inflation is probably the better way of putting it, right? So we invest in a huge variety of things in Malaysia at this current juncture.
What would be some of the areas that you're looking forward to investing? Are these in the same areas, or are you looking at some other areas as well?
We're looking at the same area. Predominantly food security is a big thing. We invested in alternative food protein, cloud kitchens, supply chain. And I think it was very topical. 2 years down the road, we saw the supply chain disruption more from a larger LISCO perspective, and we thought, okay, this makes sense that it will probably trickle down. Of course, we didn't expect the inflation to be this strong, and we didn't expect scarcity to happen so quickly. The Ukrainian war obviously accelerated that trend as well, and so we've seen a lot of factors that kind of lead us towards thinking that food security is the next big thing, and it's something that we're investing in quite a bit.
Now you actually touched a nerve, because the Ukraine conflict did highlight 2 things, which is the supply chain on semiconductor and food security.
Correct.
One clear, stark requirement right now for the global carbohydrate world is that wheat distribution or wheat planting is going to be affected. Spring season is in, nobody's
Correct.
planting wheat.
Yes.
We're looking at 30% of the wheat production is going to be impacted, at least for this year, perhaps even next year,
Yep.
and God knows, even in the years to come. You were talking about protein substitutes or alternatives.
Yes.
So these are the kind of ideas that we're also looking at in terms of how, when we look at startups going to these spaces, are they going to leverage on technology? What will be some of the trends that you can share with us on that front?
Well, okay, so when we look at alternative proteins, for example, we're looking at not just, the new fancy idea and also being just healthy, right? I think the reality of it is, the world is going from 7 billion people to 10 billion people. The current food supply is not enough. And I think we have to be very, serious about this, right? And so the way we're looking at, protein is, one, we need cheaper source, better quality protein. In the future, more consistently produced. And so we're investing in a lot of companies that do exactly that. But also at the same time, we're looking at it from a, environmental issue, which is, beef has one of the largest climate pollution, of course, besides traveling and everything else, right? But, rearing just poultry, for example, is a huge issue. So we're looking at it from, multiple angles, and therefore also then, investing in all these things. Like I said, Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, we did not see it happening. It obviously then accelerated, all these issues, whether it's wheat, whether it's grain, whether it's food. I was talking to, someone. I said even, kambing bakar, the prices have doubled. And we were joking, right? So like it used to be 800 ringgit, and now it's 1,005. Again, Raya is coming up, so I was hosting, a Raya open house, and so then, they told me that, and I said, why is that the case? Because you would think that a lot of these things were produced locally, and then it's essentially fertilizers. That's
right.
Protein, animal feeds, all these things, leading into the animal feed has gone up tremendously. So again, it's an interesting scenario for us. I think we're leading towards the trend. I think it's more out of necessity as opposed to just people being healthy. Again, for COVID, I was looking at a lot of things. And I think it was also personal curiosity, right? Vegetables was a big deal. I went into Jaya Grocer, it used to be 3 ringgit, and then it was 3.30, and then it's 3.50, and then now it's 4 ringgit per packet of 300 grams of vegetables, right? When I asked Jaya about this, they said, hey, it's a supply chain. And then I said, okay, it's coming from Cameron to your stores, right? And you had the little license. So actually, is it really supply chain issues? I'm not 100% sure. Maybe it is. But I think the reality of it is I think we see cost of production going up as well. And so, from a technological standpoint, when we invested in FIFO, which is agricultural tech, we've now, been a bit smarter with how we control the soil ingredients, the sun, the water, and therefore, producing consistent quality of food at the cheapest possible rate. I think that's where we're trying to aim, and then supplying, the 10 billion people in the world at the, again, the most nutrition, cheapest way.
One of the things that I take note of how a startup would survive is in the sense of them controlling the supply chain and potential customers and therefore demand when they produce something. FIFO is one of them. Not only do they provide the raw materials, the consistency across all the farms that they operate in. Right now there's only one, I think, in Perak.
Yes.
They already have ready buyers whenever the produce is ready. This a helicopter view of controlling the entire supply chain from production all the way to purchasing of their products really highlights the fact that companies like FIFO could do well. Is this a kind of behavior that you look for in companies that you invest in?
Well, I think the way we're looking at it is not controlling the entire thing, right? I think the way we're looking at it is innovation and disruption. So FIFO is probably the first part of it. Then they take the procurement. So for example, they do a lot of chilies and melons. So leading up to Raya, we're boosting production of all these things. But essentially, when you talk about the procurement side, we've also got a company called Glyph, right? It's a Singaporean Malaysian company. 50% of the productions are actually in JB. So they do the
a bit like FIFO actually.
No, actually, so FIFO plants, And then they do the, they make sure that we get all the best supply. And these guys are doing 100 million ringgit, right, of stuff, or production a year. So it's a bit larger than 350. So we take all from Cameron Highlands and Genting, we take a lot of all these farm produce. We bring it to Glyph, for example, in JB. They do the production, which means, maybe sometimes, we have to cut the carrots. When you cut the carrots from a raw carrot, which is 350 per kilo, now after, being treated and being vacuum packed and chopped, now it's 12 ringgit per kilo, right? So obviously there's some value add. So it's real, right? And we can go to the farm, we can go to the factory for this. And then essentially, we bring it over to, and then we've secured all the offtake with, for example, Hyatt in Singapore. And then, there's another markup between, from here, from JB to Singapore, that's the next part of it. We're also working with another portfolio company called Happy Fresh. We're about 40% of the market in Malaysia. So we're considerably large in Malaysia in the sense that, we secure a lot of the B2C consumers. And essentially, one is the B2B. During COVID, it was tough because most of the hotels and Horecas weren't working. And so we supplied them to Happy Fresh. And Happy Fresh, for example, sold. And so then we obviously more or less cut out, the Aeons of the world. I'm not saying we totally cut off Aeon, but this is a supplementary source of production for someone like, it's the last end consumers. And essentially, the way we're looking at it is, obviously lowering prices, right? The more we can do this a bit better, the better it is, in a sense that, I think in the end is also making sure that, I think we just need to deliver a consumer experience at the cheapest possible and the quickest possible manner.
And I see you value adding every single step of the way. So this does improve on your margins, improves
Hopefully.
on the customer experience as well, perhaps
Yes.
even justify the price.
Hopefully.
We'll go for one short break. When we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more with RHL Lau of RHL Ventures. Welcome back. I have with me in the studio RHL Lau of RHL Ventures. Now, this is the part where it's a bit tricky for me because I like to talk about operational stuff. I like to talk about the nitty-gritty stuff.
Sure.
But I can't avoid talking about the macro elements of what's happening right now, the global trends.
Yep.
UNSDG, for instance, they do talk a lot about sustainable development goals. There is this big issue of climate change that is going to impact the industries of agriculture more severely than previously imagined. How do you match the global trends, particularly climate change right now, with the nitty-gritty things that you guys are doing right now? Do you feel that something bigger, something that is out of our control perhaps, needs to be done in terms of trying to solve a global problem?
I think the answer is yes, and I think everyone can obviously play a part, and it's much easier than you think, right? The way we're looking at it is, we're investing, as we alluded just now, into alternative proteins. We're investing in, things that are, low carbon footprint. We're investing in things that, do innovation a little bit smarter and using data as a way of predicting, either harvest, better quality produce, cheaper. So, going back to 354, for example, a lot of the data is collected on a day-to-day basis. How much soil what soil we put in, how much water, what's the fertilizer. Everything is controlled. So when everything is controlled in a sufficient or a good quality manner, then we're producing good quality stuff, and there's very little wastage, right? And I think the aim is also to minimize wastage as much as possible, and then understanding, how do we get it to consumers faster, cheaper. Again, I emphasize faster and cheaper a lot, but also so the other thing that we know we should emphasize is wastage. During COVID, you look at the trucks coming down from Cameron Highlands, a lot of the produce was dumped. Why is that so? Because people didn't understand, what was going on, right? And maybe we also didn't need that much food initially. So I think, understanding, one, diversity of produce is necessary, but also I think the way we think about things in planning needs to be a little bit better. I'll give you an example. For Glyph, which we've invested in, they, when COVID hit, we couldn't supply to the Horecas, right? So instead, we opened up a online portal to consumers. We sold it a little bit cheaper, and obviously everybody had food delivery and produce, sent to them. So we kind of circumvented that by obviously going to the consumers right away. The other thing was then they also realized, hey, you're only one piece of the pie, right? It's a big supply chain. And then again, we went to Happy Fresh. We also we've also invested in something called Tiffin Labs, which is run by Kitchen. We said, hey, there's a lot of empty kitchen spaces around at this point. So how do we maximize utility of a kitchen space, right? So essentially, some of these guys are going in doing food prep in, the hotels, which at this point, there's not much banquets happening. And so they've got state-of-the-art equipment nobody's using. And so then we've taken over 100 hotels around the world. In Malaysia, we're rolling out 100 kitchens with Tea Life. Essentially, packaging a lot of these things in, central kitchens, for example, and then, putting it in outlets like Tea Life with Brian Liu. So this partnership was inked maybe 2 months ago. I want to say we're 20% deployed in terms of capacity in Malaysia. And you'll see, right, I think eventually by end of the year, we're deploying into 100 stores.
Okay, we'll also want to explore another area that you briefly mentioned earlier on in the interview, which is education. We've seen how this sector is ripe for disruption. We've seen how some markets, not just in this part of the world, but in the US, in South America, where the democratization of asynchronous learning is actually quite interesting to look at, from K-12 through to higher learning. We've also seen how MOOCs have evolved into something else that we completely wasn't aware possible right now. Do you feel that this is an area that needs to be thought about a little bit more deeply, considering that there are a lot more skill sets that is needed now to be taught, and a lot more industries require greater skills from the workforce?
Yes, I think, so we've invested in something called Pandai. They do K-12 education teaching or learning, however best you put it. Again, quite interestingly, is run by 3 gentlemen in Malaysia. And I said there's a lot of testing syllabus, right, in your app. And I said, why is this case? And he said, look, let's face the facts, right? And the reality of it is every Asian parent still wants you to get, good grades. And so while they made learning fun and it was gamification, they also made sure that the kids could, solve exam questions when they need it, right? And I think that was extremely important. And so, when we invested in someone, there's 2 views, right? So I think we need to change the ways of how we evaluate students and what their skill sets are. That's number 1. But also, I think we need to make it more fun for them. And obviously, the third part, which actually is the most important part, is like everything has gone digital, right? When COVID hit, I think it was a shame. I was quite blasphemous that Malaysia didn't do a little bit more to help the younger students to get and I think they've fallen behind, right? It's 2 years of no education, and that was prime learning time for some of these kids. So when we're looking at it, we've invested in Pandai with the view of disrupting this. Again, when we speak to the private schools, they're a lot they understand this, and it's a lot easier to accept. It's on the phone, it's on the app. So we understand which subject matter you're not good at, and we kind of drill you on that subject matter, and we drill you in a sufficient way, right? Like real understanding, not just test based. And so that's number 1. And then essentially, we're also looking into going into public schools. But public schools has been, a bit more resistant in terms of change. And it's usually just, hey, we'll put on a Microsoft Learning and, we just speak to you there, which is not it, right? There's a lot of forms of education. So coming back to, your skill-based learning, I think it's necessary that we explore other things. For example, coding, for sports, you learn teamwork, you learn discipline. I think for a holistic person, you need a little bit more than just being good at school. I was decent in school. I wasn't, a straight A student in my primary and secondary school. University was very different. University was, how do we think outside the box? How do we create solutions for all the problems in the world? And I think I appreciated that part of it. And so we're trying to bring that part of this, that experience into what we have in Malaysia, which again is, looking for other forms of education besides just doing everything on tests.
Your story of your education is actually resonating with a lot of Malaysians. I'm one of them.
Yes.
I failed miserably with my SPM, but I did extremely well in my university. Many of my friends, many of my peers, including some of our staff here in this office, also talks about the same thing, which is quite sad because K-12 is supposed to be fun. It's
Correct.
supposed to be inculcating that lifelong behavior of collaboration,
Correct.
innovation. But the split between public school and private school, for instance, in K-12 in Malaysia, depending on which estimates you refer to, we're looking at 95% of Malaysian students below the age of, say, 17 is in public schools.
Yes, correct.
And this is the bigger problem that we need to untangle. Do you feel that there is a solution in sight in helping out 90% of Malaysian under 17s in the near future?
Well, I don't have a good answer to this, right? I do think that, kids today are a lot smarter. They've got access of information a lot quicker. So if you look at your kids, they understand how to use the iPad already, even though they're 3-4 years old. Correct. And I remember this was really funny. So when I first started work in the US, I was under a guy who was maybe 20 years my senior. And so I was, he was talking to me about typewriting classes. And I said, I didn't necessarily understand this conversation. And he says, how do you learn how to type? And I said, I just knew how to type. Yeah, correct, right? So it was really funny. So 20 years ago, they had typewriting classes. So it was quite interesting. And he was just 20 years about, not even maybe 20, maybe 15 to 20 years older than me, right? So I think, as education, there's different form of education that is happening right now, and we don't necessarily see it, right? I think YouTube, you see all these educational programs, they teach the kids. And I think there's, we're investing in some of these things, and we're looking to invest in some of these things, whether it's from, maybe it's Islamic teaching, maybe it's STEM programs. We're also just delivering different media and different form of education, and we're doing that. And again, like I say, Pandai was something that we've done, and they're pretty successful. I'm on the board of Charterhouse, which is an English public school, but essentially, they focus a lot on sports. Science, how do we be better human beings and not just great students? And I think once you become everything, you'll be a good student either way, right? Because the studying is not that difficult, honestly. Most people understand 1 + 2, right? It's just, how do what does 3 mean? I think that's the bigger problem. And I don't think we necessarily teach the kids what 3 means, right? We just kind of tell them 1 + 2 = 3. So, and I think we're doing a little bit more to kind of, help kids understand or comprehend that sort of message a little bit better these days.
It seems like you guys have your hands full. So what's 2022 going to shape like for RHL Ventures?
So we're busy deploying some of our funds at this point. We'll probably be fully invested for Hibiscus Fund, which is the Penjana Capital Fund, which is our flagship fund at this point. We'll probably be looking to launch, another fund either end of the year or 2023. We're gearing up towards that. At this point, we're also not just the Hibiscus Fund. We've got other funds that we're managing at this point. There's probably 2 IPOs that is currently slated, one on the Australian Stock Exchange and one on the KLSE. Of course, the KLSE really depends on the SC and Bursa, right? And how receptive they are, and obviously, local investors in terms of their PE or multiples. But the Australian Stock Exchange is also a Malaysian company, interestingly. We're gearing them up. We've already done the pre-IPO round, and so likely we will do the IPO this year.
Sounds like a Patrick Grove kind of setup.
Oh, no. To be fair, wait, I shouldn't say this.
You should.
No. So I think we're looking at, they're a good Malaysian company, and then they've done quite a bit of consolidation in the market already from a Malaysia standpoint, but also from an Australian standpoint. So it's quite a big regional play at this point, and we'll see how it goes.
One final question. Your partner, Raja Hamzah, has gone on the record saying that you're targeting 200 million ringgit worth of fourth fund that you guys are doing,
Yes.
might be doing.
Yes.
Is this a path for RHL Ventures to grow strength on strength as a VC?
Yes, so I think it's a little bit more than that. I think we're quite comfortable with committing to that number at this point on the fourth fund basis. Yes, so the idea is I think we will probably hit 1 billion very quickly, and then when we hit 1 billion, we'll let you know.
Please come back. Oh, in fact, I'll go to you. In fact,
come.
Yeah.
You know where we where we are, so please come over. So we're happy to commit that. We're also looking to launch the next new funds. I think end of this year, next year will probably be where we're targeting at this point.
If there are some collaborators out there watching us right now, some startups in fact are salivating on some of the funds that you guys are dishing out to the market, how would they go about to reach you guys?
I think most people know us in Malaysia, and I think it's been pretty good. So we've also got the website, we've got LinkedIn, we've got Facebook. Just please color us on, I think what's it, www.rhlventures.com. No, sorry, no .com. Just www.rhl.ventures.
There you go.
And then come look for us.
There you go. That was our conversation with Rachel Lau, making her maiden performance here or appearance here on the show, as well as on AWANI. You've been here,
I've been here before once.
Been here before once, a few years ago.
Yeah.
So it's good to have her back. If you've missed out any part of this show, just head on to astroawani.com, look for RHL Ventures. You can also look for Notepad. There are plenty of resources that you can be found there. Until then, thanks very much for watching, and goodbye.